Imagine being on a flight, descending into an airport, everything seemingly routine when suddenly, the aircraft begins to veer off course. You feel the aircraft losing control, panic sets in, and then, everything goes silent. This is the terrifying reality that unfolded for the passengers and crew of an Airbus A319 as it crashed on final approach into an airport in Italy. Today, we're going to take you through the final moments of this doomed flight, uncover the critical mistakes made, and analyze what went wrong as the Airbus A319 descended to the ground with the crew unable to see anything. Flying blind, they struggled to control the aircraft, and tragically, they failed to recover in time. The consequences were fatal, but how did it come to this? The flight began like any other. The aircraft, an Airbus A319, was on a short journey from one city in Italy to another. It was a busy flight, with a full load of passengers on board. The weather was initially calm, with visibility good for most of the journey. But as the plane neared its destination, the situation began to deteriorate. The weather, once clear, became increasingly foggy and unpredictable. As the aircraft began its descent towards the airport, the visibility decreased significantly. The pilots found themselves facing a sudden challenge, flying blind in dense fog. But as seasoned professionals, they knew what needed to be done. They began the final approach, carefully adjusting the aircraft's speed, altitude, and direction to meet the runway. However, something went terribly wrong. Despite their best efforts, the pilots were unable to gain enough situational awareness. They failed to see critical visual cues that would have helped them stabilize the plane for landing. Without a visual reference to the runway, they were relying on instruments alone. But the instruments were not providing the full picture. There was an issue with the aircraft's autopilot system. This flaw became evident as the autopilot, which was supposed to assist with the aircraft's descent, malfunctioned. The pilots, unable to disengage the malfunctioning autopilot in time, found themselves locked into a dangerously low and unstable approach. They had no way of knowing their exact altitude or position in relation to the runway. As the aircraft descended into the thick fog, the pilots were unable to identify that they were approaching the ground too quickly. The last-minute realization came too late. The plane struck the terrain, crashing just short of the runway in a devastating impact. The crash was violent and left the wreckage scattered across the site. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, and the few survivors were quickly taken to local hospitals, but the majority of those on board perished in the disaster. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic scene, with thick smoke billowing from the wreckage, and first responders battling against the clock to save anyone who might still be alive. Investigators arrived at the crash site and began to piece together what happened. What they found was a combination of human error and mechanical failure. The failure of the autopilot system was a major factor. The pilots had no visual reference due to the fog, and the malfunctioning autopilot misled them during their critical approach. The investigation also uncovered procedural failures within the cockpit. The pilots failed to make the necessary manual adjustments to correct the autopilot's malfunction. They didn't disengage the autopilot in time, which left them relying too heavily on faulty systems. The combination of poor weather, technological failure, and a lapse in manual control resulted in the aircraft being too low and too fast for a safe landing. But beyond the technical details, this crash was a tragic reminder of the importance of teamwork, vigilance, and trust in both the aircraft systems and human judgment. The pilots had received proper training, but they were faced with an incredibly challenging scenario, flying blind in dense fog with a malfunctioning autopilot. Their ability to recover from the malfunction and regain control of the aircraft was compromised by the situation. In the aftermath of this disaster, the aviation industry closely examined the incident to identify gaps in both training and technology. The failure of the autopilot system raised questions about how such malfunctions can be better anticipated and dealt with in the cockpit. Additionally, the crash raised awareness about the dangers of relying too heavily on automation without a backup plan for manual control. The incident led to changes in how pilots are trained to handle low-visibility conditions. More emphasis was placed on decision-making under pressure, and stronger protocols were established to ensure that pilots are prepared for situations where technology may fail. While the disaster itself was tragic, the lessons learned have since led to improvements in aviation safety. New systems and technology were introduced to prevent autopilot malfunctions, and more robust training programs were developed to prepare pilots for extreme conditions. This story, though devastating, serves as a crucial turning point for aviation safety. As we look back on this incident, we're reminded of how important it is to remain vigilant in the skies. Even when everything seems under control, there are moments when external factors or equipment failure can change everything in an instant. The crash of this Airbus A319 teaches us about the balance between technology and human skill and how it takes both to ensure safe flights. What do you think? Could the crash have been prevented if the pilots had acted sooner or made different decisions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What changes would you suggest to improve safety in similar situations? Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay informed, and join us next time as we continue to explore the untold stories of aviation. Until then, fly safely.